Welcome to this explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're tuning in today because we're diving into a true masterpiece of early 20th century poetry. We're going to unpack Wilfrid Gibson's devastatingly brilliant narrative poem, The Stone. It's this profound, heartbreaking exploration of grief, entirely grounded in the harsh realities of working-class life. We'll be looking closely at how a sudden industrial tragedy triggers an extreme emotional breakdown, and how the setting and plot weave together to tell that story.
And Gibson, well, he doesn't ease us into the story at all. He drops us right into the narrative in media res, literally right into the middle of the action. We suddenly hear a young woman standing at a stonemason's door delivering this repetitive, numb plea for him to carve a gravestone. It perfectly sets the plot in motion, and honestly, it's an opening that immediately signals something is terribly, deeply wrong.
Okay, let's dive into this because this is really the central question of the entire narrative. How does a literal block of cold rock become a haunting metaphor for a young woman's total psychological and emotional petrification? We're going to trace the exact plot of this poem to see how Gibson pulls off this transformation. And believe me, the way this story unfolds is going to stay with you long after we're done. To truly grasp the plot, we kind of need to map out the timeline of her stasis. The poem actually spans several days. On day 1, we have the fatal accident. Then, for days 2 and 3, the young woman enters this complete, tearless, sleepless paralysis. Finally, on day 4, she arrives at the stonemason's workshop. Laying out this timeline is absolutely crucial because it tracks the progression of her grief from that initial shock all the way to a deeply unsettling ritual. And this brilliantly shows how the setting and the plot are completely intertwined here. Gibson uses two very distinct physical environments to mirror the internal devastation of the characters. First, we have the quarry. It's loud, explosive, and full of very public physical danger. And then we contrast that with the workshop, which is silent, still, and steeped in this very intimate, creeping, emotional danger. So, let's look at that first major plot point taking place right in the workshop. The young woman has just arrived at the stonemason's door. She is the absolute picture of profound sorrow, but, not in the way you might expect. There are no tears, there is no wailing, it's just emptiness. She just looks at the mason and asks this, "And will you cut a stone for him? A stone for him?" she said. Her query is entirely repetitive, right, and completely emotionless. The way she just circles back to those exact same words establishes an immediate tone of shock and a really dangerous fixation. She is entirely hollowed out, driven only by the momentum of this one final grim task. To understand why she's like this, the narrator, our stonemason, transitions the plot to the backstory. We move 3 days prior, leaving the quiet workshop for the violent, explosive setting of the quarry. This is the inciting incident of the plot. Her lover, who's described as a lively stripling, brave and tall, was working in this incredibly hazardous manual labor environment. A shot of explosives was fired, a warning call rang out, but he loitered just a second too long. A splintered rock fell, crushing him instantly into a lifeless heap. It's a brutal, sudden end in a highly dangerous industrial setting. Now the plot snaps back to the traumatic aftermath. The mason, who knows the young woman, hurries to her home to gently break the news of this terrible accident. But you know how it is in a close-knit community. Word travels fast. Someone else, someone the mason bitterly calls a poor fool, actually beats him to her door. That fool just blurted out the news without any care at all. And look at how Gibson describes the impact of those words. They struck life, lifeless, at a word, and dropped it at her feet. The insensitive delivery of this news physically mimics that falling rock in the quarry. It metaphorically strikes her heart dead before the mason can even step in to soften the blow. Let's move forward and see how this builds into the physical reality of her grief. For 3 days and 3 nights, she enters a complete stasis. While his mother weeps normally, this young woman has no tears. She gets absolutely no sleep. She has these unblinking, staring eyes that see nothing, yet somehow see everything. She becomes completely disconnected from time itself. Gibson is utilizing a brilliant technique here called metaphorical mapping. It's like he's drawing direct parallels between the physical objects of the setting, the crushing stone, the cold steel of the chisel, and her internal emotional landscape. Her shattered life and petrified heart are perfectly mirrored by the very rock that killed her lover and the gravestone that will mark his end.
Which brings us back to the fourth night and the hushed, oppressive silence of the stonemason's workshop. She returns to his door, repeats her request, and then just sinks into a chair. For nights on end, she sits there by candlelight, watching him work in absolute eerie silence. So the crucial point is that her grief is actually contagious. Her silent, unseeing stare physically drains the mason as he works. He says her eyes plucked the heart from him, that they sucked his breath away and literally cut me to the bone. The setting of the workshop has completely transformed into a place of shared, suffocating trauma.
And now we hit the thematic climax of the narrative. It's the ultimate intersection of the plot's labor and the tombstone setting. Because every single time the mason strikes that chisel with his mallet, he realizes he isn't just carving rock anymore. Now, what's really interesting here is this chilling personification of death. The mason realizes that death is an active partner in the workshop. While the mason's chisel cuts the literal stone, death is using every single stroke to cut deeper and deeper into the young woman's heart. It is a brilliant, terrifying image of grief just hollowing someone out in real time. Finally, the memorialization ritual reaches its resolution. The gravestone is finished, the mason lays his mallet down, and in that quiet moment, the young woman offers the only vocal expression of emotion she gives in the entire narrative. She breathes her lover's name with a final sigh. She stands up, passes slowly through the open door, and she never crosses his threshold again. You might think that's the end, right? That she simply walked away to mourn in peace. But Gibson has one final, devastating plot twist waiting for us in the very last two lines of the poem. It is an absolute emotional gut punch that reframes the entire story. The very next night, the mason works late, and he works alone. But he isn't finishing her lover's stone. He stayed late to cut her name upon the stone as well. The ritual of watching that memorial being made was literally the only thing keeping her tethered to the world. Once it was complete, her implied psychological and physical death followed immediately. She died of a broken heart, turned entirely to stone herself. Which leaves us with this final, provocative thought. When that splintered rock fell in the loud, violent quarry 3 days before, did it actually kill them both? The physical blow took him, but the shockwave shattered her beyond repair, turning her to stone just as surely as the rock he lay beneath. It's a haunting masterpiece of setting and plot. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I highly encourage you to go read Wilfrid Gibson's poetry for yourself. Until next time, keep learning.